I'm very happy to be introducing Dr. Aisa Kirabo. His name, I know I'm not saying that quite right, but she's going to forgive me, who is Deputy Executive Director and Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations Human Settlements Program, or otherwise more commonly known as UN Habitat. We are delighted that she was able to come tonight. She is going to, she was the former governor of the Eastern Province, which is the largest province in Rwanda, with a population of 2.5 million. She also previously, before that, was mayor of Kigali City for about 5 years, one of the fastest growing cities in the world. And she, I think that many of you here know that if not the pressing problem, one of the most pressing problems in the coming decades is surely sort of the rapid urbanization of many parts of the world. And she has really did a tremendous job in figuring out how to help those cities and regions grow in both an equitable and sustainable manner. And I think she's going to talk to us a little bit about that tonight. So without further ado, Aisa.
Thank you very much, Ingrid. Good evening to you all. Let me first of all thank the leadership of NYUAD for having invited me to deliver a lecture. I don't know whether I should really call it that, but to just share with you my experience and listen to you, because this is an area that I feel deserves attention. And it's always very important for leaders to keep connected. So for me, it's a very big opportunity to be here. And I want to thank you very much for coming to share with me your evening. I come at a time, I think, when it is even very relevant for us to think about this, because as we are based in Nairobi. And as we were watching what was happening in New York in terms of the Hurricane Sandy, we all as leaders kept on thinking, what if this was happening, for instance, in Kigali? How prepared would I be? How about the communities? What if it were Nairobi? What is the role of leadership, and what is the role of the world community in ensuring that as the world urbanizes, we ensure our people of safety and security. We ensure our people that we will be able to stand with them through difficult times, and at the end of the day, realize what we refer to as sustainable development. So it's against that background that I believe what I'll be sharing with you really is a very core or simple perspective of a very big theme that I cannot cover tonight. And I don't want to claim an authority, but at least I think I can say that I've had the opportunity of serving my home country and now the UN in a unique position where I haven't been alone really. When recognition is given to me, I really wish you knew, because there were very noble activities and commitments of people whose names are not known, that stood with me as we forged our way forward. But as a leader, I take that with a sense of humility and pride, and that's why I feel, in a very modest way, I want to share with you where we have come from. And for me, it inspires me that if we could make a difference in Rwanda. For those of you who don't know Rwanda, it's a country that went through a genocide in 1994. And post-1994, for many years, it seemed like a very hopeless situation to even think of life after genocide, let alone development. But it was possible, and today it's developing, not by accident, but out of a determined commitment of the leadership and its people to make a difference and overcome evil with good. And if it can happen back at home, I'm sure it can happen anywhere else in the world. I don't want to claim that we are masters, but I think there are some key lessons to learn from. So it's again that background that I feel also an honor, and I want to thank my colleagues from the UN Habitat who have come to join me, that today as Deputy Executive Director of UN Habitat, Before I talk about Rwanda, I want to talk about UN Habitat and what we do and how we feel this is of great relevance, that my invitation to NYU, I hope, will establish a longer term relationship that will bind us together towards a common cause with a clear purpose and impact on the lives of the people that we serve in different capacities. Now, I want to look at you. I want to move this. I think I need to look for a way in between. Someone who is dealing with the technology will be able to help. But the thing is like facing urban challenges in developing countries. Okay. My theme, can you hear me well? Yeah. Looks like the mic here was probably better. You think that will work? I want to have a look at them. I don't know. I'm going to do this. Yeah. It's urbanization in the 21st century, opportunities for social and economic transformation. This, if we can dim this light, this is what the world looks like at night. It is how the world is lit in darkness. And it gives a reflection of the level of urbanization. As you will see, most of Northern America, Northern Europe, and parts probably of Asia, India are lit, much more lit than certainly Africa and parts of South America. This is largely a reflection of the level of urbanization, although there are some trends that are a bit different. For instance, I think India, where the cost of energy is a bit low, so people can afford lighting. But this is just to give us an idea of what urbanization, the process and the level of development is in the different parts of the world. Now, when we talk about urbanization, I would like to raise a few issues that are critical. The first one is that there is a positive correlation between urbanization and development. Urbanization has been seen to be a source or a means for development. And when we talk about urbanization, at least in our definition in UN Habitat, it's not about cities. It covers a whole range of spectrum, right from mega cities to capital cities to small townships to even village trading centers, as long as there is a certain level of agglomeration and a commonness of basic infrastructure and unity, that is like a seed. But in that context, it still is urbanization. So this graph shows you the relationship between GDP and urbanization. And I think maybe to extrapolate further on this, why do we relate urbanization with development? Because with urbanization, we bring, first of all, the human capital together. And when you bring the human capital together, there is room for creativity. There is room for debate. There is room for the intellectual discourse that comes out of that finally leads to much development. But more important, more so also, the better use of scarce resources. When we talk about infrastructure, the cost of infrastructure is so high that we cannot imagine utilizing it with a dispersed community. So when you have infrastructure together, the cost effectiveness of utilizing it, in addition to the human capital intellectual discourse, all work together to make urbanization a real good source of sustainable development. But we shall see that this is not what happens all the time, especially if there are some factors that are not in place. Now, the urban population, the pace of urbanization and what is happening in the world, maybe we'll get back to this because you'll understand it better later. But it is to say, if you recall, in the world that we saw where there is a lot of lighting, and the figures that you're seeing here, because they'll be showing you that Africa, in the next 8 years, will be having a larger population, urbanized population, than Europe and South America. And yet this urbanization may not necessarily mean lighting, may not mean development, it may mean something else. So this is talking about masses, big numbers of people in urban areas, but not necessarily living a fulfilled life that you can define as sustainable urbanization. To put this also in another contextual analysis, when we talk about urbanization today, the world is urbanizing faster today, fastest today than ever before. And I think, as you all know, almost half the world population now is urbanized. But where is this urbanization pace moving faster? As you can see, the level in green from 1950s to 2010, 2030, all throughout, developed countries will continue to urbanize, but at an almost stable rate. Whereas in developing countries, it's moving so fast. We will have a look at this as an opportunity, but also a potential challenge. Now, maybe before we get to the details of the depth of urbanization, let's look at historically the trends that have defined it. The 20th century global standard city model indicates that after the Second World War, for the first time in urban history, there was a global standard city. And this is a result of discussion and debate that went around, and people came to some common understanding on how maybe the ideal urban model should be. But this also was based on some, I probably will call them technological advancements. One is the transformation of the car industry, which in terms of mobility really enhanced now the intellectual or the human capital moving around. And then the emergence of the middle class that created markets for the real estate industry, and also availability of energy. At this time it was inexpensive, especially nuclear energy. Now, these are some of the models that I'm saying are in different parts of the world, but are quite similar. As you can see, China, the US, Bolivia, Mexico, different parts of the world, but they have got like a common prototype that runs all throughout, and that gives you a feeling that I think at this point in time, people were meeting as experts in urban planning and architectural work, and coming out with principles that probably they felt were like a model to follow. Now, beyond this, this is what we see, what was defined as the global standard city model. It has a number of characteristics. The first one is that it transforms cities, but not for the better, and that I'll explain later. And as I mentioned, a product of the big scale of the car manufacturing industry that enhanced mobility, and as you can see, there is a lot around these networks of communication that make it viable and makes it like economically sound to have people together, because this time the ease of communication is made a lot easier. Then they become centers of business, positions the business of urban real estate as a leading economic sector. And it was a very successful and lucrative model for some. But the danger that came with it is that there was, to a large extent, or to some extent, abandoning of national affordable housing programs for the poor. It was an advantage for those who were successful in business, but they needed, even then, finally it wasn't sustainable because they needed labor, they needed people around them, especially those probably who didn't have that much capital. So finally, we are going to see the consequences of this. On the other hand, I guess many of you probably have seen this in different parts of the world. So with agglomeration, people started looking, the land, inelastic as it is, became very expensive, and people found a lot of benefits from living and working closely together. So you have still the highway. Goodness, I think I've clicked something. Someone help. Okay, all right, okay. No one to get back to. Yeah, thank you. So the highway is still the backbone of the city. The super block is really these very high, tall buildings. Then there's a high level of zoning that will be further elaborated. Then there is unbalanced density. As you can see, there is some extreme density in some areas, whereas the others, you will see that much later. And then people realize maybe this is too much of block stuff. We need some greenery. So the use of greenery as a decorative tool to the model was emerged, and then the emergence of the urban market. Now, I want us to go very fast through the zoning. This is like really so you can see with zoning, you have got a recreational zone, residential, commercial, business, technological park, industry, and it somehow makes sense. But finally, it becomes so expensive because people live integrated lives. And I think we all know that you need to have your children go for recreation, including yourself. You want to go to office, and you go to industry. So you find people running around, one family finding themselves moving around, taking, and that becomes very expensive. The more the cost of energy becomes expensive. But what still? You will have bulging slums, because for all these activities that are in the planned zones, there is need for some labor, some contribution from other society members whose livelihoods have not been planned for. So together with, next to the beautiful planned areas, you have slums popping out. In a practical way, we'll start seeing some of the problems that have come up. I'll go through them very fast, then the pictures probably will be showing us. Now, here is a situation where, as you can see, the road network is quite good. Maybe this is not so very common here in New York, but in places where the public transport system hasn't been well planned, you've got lots of vehicles, most of them are private, maybe some they do public transport, but this is a city that is now becoming immobile, and finally the city center is going to start experiencing low business, and finally sometimes decay. People just get totally stagnated, and they look for ways of getting out of there. You have got unemployment, slums, inadequate urban basic services, and planned urban expansion, and agent accumulation and conflict over land resources, vulnerability to disaster and risk, and sustainable energy consumption, poor mobility systems, and increasing carbon emission in cities, rapidly expanding economies. Now, this is one extreme. As you can see, if you do remember, the zoning. Now, this could be a residential, very high end. You can see a swimming pool on every floor. Then you see the sports facilities there. And just look across the road, this is a slum. And this is the same, it's like the same area, same country, maybe same city. But what we call the urban divide, the level of standard of living of the people here and here, they are worlds apart. And whether we like it or not, finally, there will be social strife. There will be insecurity, there will be conflict. Sometimes it might, unfortunately, cost lives. Now, the emergence, this is about slums. Let me first give a very brief definition of what we call a slum, and this is how we define it in the UN Habitat. The UN Habitat defines a slum as a household, a slum household as a group of individuals living under the same roof in an urban area who lack one or more of the following: durable housing and a permanent nature that protects against extreme climate conditions, sufficient living space, easy access to safe water in sufficient amounts at an affordable price, access to adequate sanitation in the form of a private or public toilet shared by a reasonable number of people, security of tenure that prevents forced eviction. There is a lot of diversity to that. But just to give you an estimate of what is happening, slums represent nearly 800 million people in the world. Like, people living in slums are about 800 million, and about 62% of them are in sub-Saharan Africa. But when we go according to the definition that I just gave you, you realize that more than 1 billion people lack access to safe water, and more than 2.5 billion lack access to adequate sanitation. And that means security, because that means the problems of public health, the problem of child mortality are quite high due to preventable diseases. What is a slum, and how does a slum come about? A slum is a spontaneous form of urbanization. Whenever we don't plan urbanization, we are planning for one thing. We are planning for a slum. And it is the most visible part of the informal sector. The slum is a result of the absence of the institutional capacity to plan for growth of a city, and the difficulty. On the other hand, you may have the addition of unplanned urbanization is where you have got limited resources, whether in terms of infrastructure development or individuals' capacity to put up the structures. Where you have capacity from individuals, then you will have what we refer to as the urban sprawl, where you have good houses, but disorganized and without order and without also sufficient access to basic services that should be common to all. On the other side, what has been happening when leaders realize the impact of the slum, they try to create a secure environment that is somehow artificial, that you don't realize that it's really artificial, but finally it is. And this is the mall. The mall is something beautiful, but the mall is, in a way, an artificial street. It's like cordons off, or it differentiates between, especially if you do remember the picture that we had where people had swimming pools on every floor. If you leave that and go to the mall, that means really you're not going to be, if I may say, perturbed, or you're not going to be challenged by the slums that you're not seeing. So you feel like you're connected with people, but really it's a selection of a group of people who belong to that status of living. That won't stop those who are suffering outside there to still feel cut off or divided. So that is why we don't discourage it that much, but we bring it out to the leadership to ensure that, yes, while you encourage the malls to grow, please do some work on improving the livelihoods of those people in slums, because they also deserve a decent life. Then the gated community. I think those who come from developing countries, you know that we have got gated communities are even sometimes fenced with electric fencing, and just to ensure that, well, it's only a particular group of people who have access, but we know that sometimes what happens is that they are sometimes broken down and conflict still will rise. So, and then you will have conflict, as you can see, discontent with the city, especially where you have youth unemployment. So they will go out there and destroy what you have invested in for quite some time, because there is a high cost of living, the cost of transport is high, cost of housing, food, energy, and these are very basics in life. And the exponential growth of and the cost of urban land makes it even much harder with the financial crisis. I think we've all seen this in different parts of the world to different levels of degrees. Now, what can we do? What we are promoting as UN Habitat with our Habitat Agenda partners is to ensure that as we foster urbanization, let's do it in an integrated, equitable, prosperous, and sustainable manner. And what do we need to do this? What we need is not like rocket science, but it's very, very fundamental. And as we go through it, we realize that maybe most of the time it is known, but I would like to hear from you whether it's an issue of commitment or maybe limited resources. But I think there is the need for leadership. And leadership, I'm not talking about only those in power, but leadership across, even within in universities, in civil society, private sector, leadership to feel that we need to do something about improving and doing things right. So the first one really is the fundamental principle is fostering urban governance and legislation, so that whatever development we're talking about here is inclusive. even people living in slums, they know their problems and they know how to get out of there. If only they can be supported and facilitated. But this has to be done in a manner that they don't end up in a dependence system. There has to be rights and responsibilities accrued to this. Maybe I'll share that much later as I share my experience. Second, we need to have proactive and long-term urban planning and design. Because what has been happening in many countries is that urban planning is done in an ad hoc manner, short-term, zonal, maybe responding to a need to promote investment or to a need to protect a swamp or something that is not very long-term. And because it's not long-term, sooner than later then they hit a snag. So we need to have a look at that. Then 3, urban economy. What I didn't mention, which we've been observing, I'm sure we aren't alone in UN Habitat, is that urbanization historically, I think, has been much in the West, in the Western world, Europe, much of Northern America, and here it did take place following industrialization. And because it did follow industrialization, in a way, it had an economic driver built into it. As people transformed from agriculture to industrialization, people moved and agglomerated because there was some employment. Now, what is happening today in the fast pace of urbanization you're seeing in developing countries is it's happening by default. People don't necessarily have access to employment, but people do move, maybe sometimes because the conditions in the rural areas are so hard, you put in a lot of effort, and then the hazards that are beyond you of the climate change, weather, then the cost of inputs becomes too high, finally it doesn't make sense, then people go to the slum, and the slum has become like a platform of transformation. People go to slums not probably to stick there, but to get an address in order to get a job to some place. So finally, maybe that platform finally doesn't become a transit area and becomes permanent, and then you have a family and things get a bit more complicated. So urban economy, especially like rural economic, local economic development is very important, but also the willingness of leaders in towns and cities to embrace investment promotion, to be willing to allow competition, to be willing to allow transparency, to be willing to bring in international capital, whether in terms of research or in terms of investment, to be willing to let go of traditions that may not be very constructive. The other one is investment in basic infrastructure and services and housing. And with this, I think, as we'll see, the protection of public space is becoming a lot much more harder. From our research, we are seeing that a city like, I think, New York and other developed, well-planned cities, they have maintained up to around between 35 to 40% of public space remaining as public space. But when it's unplanned, in slums, sometimes it goes to as low as 1%. So there you know that really there is no way out. Something has to happen. And finally, it kills life and it kills business. Then we have to build for resilience. Whether it's resilience to natural or man-made disaster, I think the world is showing us continuously that challenges to risk are increasing. Now, back to basics. In terms of planning, I mentioned it, let's plan in advance. When you're planning urbanization, a city or a town, you don't want to develop, to invest and then demolish what you've invested in the next 5 to 10 years. But if you don't plan it properly, very soon you will be forced to demolish. So you have to plan in advance, minimum 30 years, plan at scale, and in phases. You can't do everything at the same time. But at least be clear as to what you're going to do within that long term, what is going to be done in the first 5 years, following 5 years, and allow a bit of flexibility to that. Plan for social integration. This has to be intentional, because if you just leave it to the rigors of nature and the pressures of the private or the individual sector, finally, the vulnerable will fall out. And you can be sure that they will, again, be, they won't have been given an opportunity to avail their best, and finally, they won't support the system, and you'll have problems as you see. Plan for density. This you don't probably feel here because you already are density. But where I come from, maybe partly because people mainly come from the rural setting, and the rural setting is like you need privacy, you need a compound, then you need another one behind, then you need your uncle to come and feel comfortable, then your in-laws should have a private thing. So finally, you have everybody wanting something like an acre. And it's the urban sprawl is so expensive. But people don't feel the expense because the system hasn't made them pay for the cost of the road, the cost of the sewer, the cost of the electricity. It all falls on the public sector, and that drains the economy. So we have to look for a way of, while we are engaging people, but they have to know that with every right, there's a responsibility if you're to be sustainable. And then connectivity, I think I mentioned that, and plan for ecological sustainability, energy efficiency, and risk prevention. I think I'll mention this because it was a big challenge for me when we were planning for Kigali. All of a sudden, these consultants whom we hired, they did an assessment and came back and told me, Mayor, only 50% of your land is developable. And Rwanda is already a very small country. So I was still struggling to see how much I could utilize. But they told me the other can only be developed if you invest in a lot of, because it's either too steep or in the swamp. If you want your city to last long, forget about the other 50% for now. Stick to the other 50% and manage it very well. So if you have a terrain that is like that, you need first of all to be aware as a leader, what can I change and what can't I change? And how can I live amicably with that which I can't change? So you don't just go in ruthlessly trying to change things that are well beyond you, because sooner than later, the swamp will reclaim itself. And it will reclaim itself with your people. And the hills will also reclaim themselves by having these landslides and everybody going down with it. So you need to know how much you can be able to take on. Now, the role of UN Habitat. First of all, we want and we facilitate urban policy reform and implementation. This is a big agenda within the UN. UN Habitat is a small agency as compared to our agenda. We are proud of who we are, but we also feel we need to do our work smartly. We don't have to do everything. We only must do what we must do. And the rest we can do by facilitating and by partnering and networking with partners. So how do we do this? First of all, we carry out research, and from that research, we foster dialogue and debate. We also strengthen, we foster partnerships and networks and strengthen them. And we've got specific strategies and fora where we do this. Every once in 2 years, we have what we call a World Urban Forum. In this World Urban Forum, we listen to ideas, issues to do with urbanization from all Habitat Agenda partners. We just recently had one in September. So this is a very important platform where we gather information, knowledge, and also give others an opportunity to strengthen networks amongst themselves as long as we have that commonness of purpose. We work closely with academia. We have got a collaboration with universities, and we would like to request that probably be part of us from that platform. We have what we call the World Urban Campaign. That's World, kindly bear with me, I missed something great. It's World Urban Campaign. Now, World Urban Campaign is an advocacy platform because we need to have a change or awareness creation. So in this awareness creation, we need to bring it close to people in a language they understand. So we have this campaign is composed of a multi-stakeholder team, and through it, we want to reach out to the world just to bring the urban agenda to everybody's attention and also seek for their support and contribution to it. Then we have uniquely a big opportunity that we would like to request you to be part of. I'm sure you followed what happened in Rio Plus 20 in Brazil. Unique to our Habitat agenda, once in every 20 years we do a reflective analysis. where has urbanization come from? And this is urbanization, urban development and human settlements. Where do we want it to go? So it will, the last one took place in Istanbul. The first one was, I think, in Vancouver. You will help me? Yes. Then there was that 76 or 86? 76. 76 was in Vancouver. 96 was in Istanbul. 2016 is to be somewhere that will be selected soon. So, but between next year and 2016, we are in a preparatory process, consultative process, to ensure that we now focus on what could be the key drivers. What can we do better? What haven't we put in place that we need to improve on? Just to ensure that urbanization contributes to sustainable development. That's on the part of advocacy and part of research, and also part of dialogue and partnerships. Now, in more tangible, maybe operational ways, we provide technical assistance for program implementation and urban planning. We work with cities, we work with towns, we work with national governments, we work with ministries, we work from different perspectives, and we still work with our partners to fulfill this gap, which is really big. We can't even say that we're happy. We would love to also engage you on that. We work with local governments and governance structures in capacity building, centralization, legislation, local economic development, as I mentioned. Now, I bring you to Kigali. I chose the refreshing one. And I wish I'd been there. I tried to get access to my best video clips and slides, but it wasn't very easy because I had so many things to do. But if I happen to get more, I'll send it. Now, Kigali, as I said, it's a very beautiful city. It is also difficult to plan for, because in that beauty, there is a bit of vulnerability. You have to protect the slums, as I said, you have to protect the hills. It is cool, and it has a history, it has a character. One that is good, another one which is challenging. Just as a summary of background, it has slightly over 1 million people. That's about 10% of the national population. And over 65% of that is unplanned settlement. That was statistics given in year 2003. Now, I wanted to run very fast through with you some of the core things that I could think of which helped me and my team, my colleagues, to make a difference to making Kigali the clean, the safe, and investor-friendly city that it is today. First of all, we committed ourselves to ensuring a strong sense of belonging by the community, and that is at community level. We strengthened urban governance. We built a unit of purpose, a sense of belonging and dignity and pride through participatory decision-making and implementation of the decisions made. We have in our culture something we call umuganda, and umuganda is like mutual self-help. Around people, since time immemorial, had problems, but they would sit as a community, discuss their problems, and together solve their problems. So we built that into a legal framework. So every last Saturday of the month, the morning, people get together at their community level just to sit and discuss the issues. This was very, very fundamental because we were in a healing process. We were coming from a genocide. We were having people return from outside who had spent so many years outside. We were having a clash of cultures. We were having poverty and everything else you can think of. But I think the worst crime to humanity is genocide. It was so deep, it was so raw, you couldn't move away from it. There were so many other mechanisms. I just chose a few because there was also the process of truth and reconciliation and people coming out to talk about their role in what happened. I wouldn't probably want to go into that because I have limited time. But for purposes of building the unit of purpose, apart from that legal framework that provided a sense of justice There was also the social cohesion that came out of this, which meant that people knew each other. In an urbanizing world, we lose connection. You don't know your neighbor. And finally, actually, for those who even have people who clean their homes, they don't even know their names. It gets that bad. So there has to be a very intentional way of keeping people connected and everybody feeling they are valued. And that was very, very important. Then, that is what I'm talking about, also about building systems of mutual help, responsibility, and accountability. With this, what I want to add, we also built a system of recognizing best performers in very simple ways. Maybe if there's an elderly lady who lost everybody and someone has come out to help her, when we are meeting on that last day of the month, the people who have come out to do noble activities are recognized and appreciated, and the leadership recognizes that. So that mobilizes everybody to go into that. Very briefly, that built a sense of belonging and a sense of pride. So we have cleaning that is done also on that particular day. But people, it goes beyond that, because you wouldn't keep your house clean just because, your compound clean just because of that one man. It was a campaign, and we felt like as Rwandans, we didn't need foreign aid to do our own general cleaning. So, and we don't owe it to anybody, but people have to feel responsible. That also was built. Kigali today is, I think, really rightly so, the safest city in the region. And it is green. We were given the School of Honor Award by UN Habitat. The first time it was given to a sub-Saharan African city, that was 2008. And everybody felt a great sense of joy. So what I did from this, I also now decided to share my joy with the people. We have youth who are doing very humble activities, meeting, because there would be a youth forum. I established several fora. One for women, then for youth, then for private sector, then civil society, so that I could have time to listen to the different voices, because everybody cannot speak at the same time. If you don't create a platform that gives voice to everybody, then finally you get only connected to those that can reach you, and then you lose connection until you become irrelevant. So it is very important that you do that. So with that connection, people felt that sense of pride up to today. Then at city level, urban governance, I wanted to say here, we promoted clear systems of public accountability. We had, maybe let me finish this, and performance-based management systems of service delivery. We would develop a plan through a participatory mechanism. I remember we established a governance system of leaders right from the village level, coming to the mayor, of 3,500 people, whom I would meet at least twice a year. We would gather their views and then finally come up with a plan of what we're going to do, with a clear budget of what we're able to have. And then once we have signed that, with the president, every 3 months, our performance, we invite in the public and we showcase everything, including the roads, whatever we're supposed to do, and why we were not able to do ABCD, seeking for their support. Now, this had a twofold effect. One, it mobilized people to come up with their own support. So actually, we didn't really think that people are going to be able to support that much. But for instance, for the cleaning budget, by the time I left the city, it had decreased from 70 to 30% contribution from the city, because the rest was voluntary contribution by the people. Then secondly, it also helped them to have their own accountabilities in whatever sectors they were. And then thirdly, it helped people hold us accountable, but it also gave us a chance to hold them accountable. So this is how the system worked. And at the end of the year, if I was going to present, when I would be presenting my performance management in Parliament, everybody would be listening like they were the mayor. And if we were successful, everybody would be dancing. If I had failed at some point, everybody would be hitting. So it's a bit of pressure. You really have to manage very well. But at the end of the day, even when they hit you, I learned to be more humble than I was, to be very honest with you. I learned to turn some of the stones hit at me and look at them and say, if only you could support me more, I'm willing to do more. So that the more the more accepting you are to constructive criticism, the healthier it is. And that comes with time. Then there was the issue that I wanted to touch base on, promoting business and investment. Sometimes people confuse promoting business, especially maybe in the developing countries, with a selling of land to foreigners, and it becomes a very big issue because there is a sense of loss. But it's all so important that we try to showcase to people that we need to let go of what we have, as long as we have a clear benefit shared with everybody. Of course, no land belongs to nobody except that public land in the swamps. Every land belongs to somebody. And if I'm talking about promoting investment, I'm actually saying some Rwandese should leave their land. So there had to be a clear compensatory mechanism and a resettlement mechanism, and also a clear, transparent investors competing for that land without any hidden agenda. And everybody had the right to say, why did you do this? And it had to be explained. And then I distanced myself from it because you can't be judge and jury. So there had to be a mechanism where now the mayor, according to the law, the mayor doesn't issue out land, the mayor understands the master plan, markets it, and then lets the technical people do their work so that you can come in to oversee what you haven't been really part and parcel of. That we worked with support from the World Bank. I think you've heard about this Green Business Climate. It really critically analyzes you. And the first time it did, I was so mad. I said, how can I work so hard like this and you put me among the last ones? Do you know what I go through? Do you know what time I sleep? After quarreling, they said, Aisa, all we need is you to listen and objectively look at the criteria we are showing you. And if you're willing, we actually are ready to train you with your staff. For me, that was the best news. Because now I had the passion. I felt we were doing everything possible. But unfortunately, in terms of capacity, there were a lot of gaps. And actually, I realized that most of the weaknesses were not so much about the city per se, but they were a coordination mechanism. So if you want land, you have to go there, the process that you have to go, the different areas. Finally, we established a one-stop center in the city with clear responsibilities, timelines, and a client charter. And so people knew when to expect to get a service, and if they didn't, whom to address it. And then finally, 2 years down the line, we were among the very best. And by the time I left up now, it continues, because it was very clear that if we didn't improve here, then we cannot talk about employment creation. It's not politicians to bring jobs. It's the private sector to be supported to create jobs, and that's it. So I needed to very well capture that and support my team to do that. Then we invested in the Kigali City master plan. This started well before me. In 2003, as I mentioned, we had zonal plans. But when we were planning for the city, we thought and we invested big. Because we felt if you're going to develop a city, it's not something that you want to do again. So we looked for the best architects and planners. We took some from the US, from the American Planners Association. There's a company called OZ Consultants. We took some from Singapore. So we brought Singaporeans and Americans together and we requested them to do a master plan for us. But we also did a lot of participatory engaging the communities because we wanted our own architectural richness from our history not to be lost. We didn't want a Singapore or a US city erupting in Kigali. We needed principles, but again, anchored within our own culture. So we brought also our own local experts. And this was based on the 3 E's. Economy, to ensure that this is an economically sound plan. Ecology, again, protection of what I said, 50% developable. Equity, to ensure integration, social, economic integration, and not have like a part for the rich and a part for the poor. And I want to say that again, it won a number of awards. By the time I left, there were 4 awards, including one from the American Association of Urban Planners. Also brought us a number of rich and very willing voluntary supporters to the cause. and we enlarged our platform for debates, and we ensued with implementation. Now, implementation of the master plan. Like I said, you have to do it in phases. You have this zeal, you have this dream, but where do you begin from? What is the purchasing power? Who wants to come, and why should they come? So every single day, I remember our president telling us that, remember one thing about Rwanda. You don't have gold, you don't have oil, you don't have really what makes you attractive, apart from being nice. Try to be as nice as possible so that people can be attractive to you. First of all, the cost of construction is like 40–50% higher because it's landlocked. So why would I want to come to Kigali? Yes, you have a good climate, but well, climate is number Z. Think about something else. So we took it seriously upon ourselves, and we really mobilized resources. Like I said, one, locally, then two, from outside. And mobilizing resources here is not only financial, it's a human capital. So if you're talking about mobilizing resources, really the core thing is the human. And I'll tell you that there's one thing, there are many, but there are some that I do remember very well that struck me. We sold a piece of land, which was public land, to some private investment company. There were people who were doing informal trade, selling biscuits and sweets on their arms here like this. And they had to be shifted. But we offered them another piece of land and told them, you know, try maybe 6 months, maybe 1 year, save some money and develop a structure, but it has to be a business structure. So these people went, they worked hard, they formed a cooperative, they were trained, and they came up with a structure. I'll show it to you. About worth 6 billion Rwandan francs, which is like 1 billion US dollars. And they got a loan with a 10%. But they were able to do that because we had developed the condominium law, where every small aspect, every small room could belong to an individual. But in a cooperative, they were able to do that. And in 4 years, they were almost completing their loan, because every day, and they were explaining this to us, whereas I used to make a difference and go out with my girlfriend, make a difference, a bonus a day, and then maybe, do something, But this time I know I have to deliver this money to the bank. So because of that intention to save, because you want to get to something, then the saving culture is further developed. So there's a lot of potential in people if we can tap into it and give them an enabling environment. This is what I'm talking about, the reviewing of the legislative framework. The legislative framework abiding by the principle of equality of people. Everybody has a right to security of their property. And it is the role of the leadership to protect the security of people and their property, irrespective of who you are. To the extent that, however, humble or from a lowly beginning, they would still bring up their case to the mayor, and I would stop business to ensure that that person is protected. Once they know that, even if they are to move, they have a mechanism of fair competition, then you have a buy-in. I think I've mentioned almost all of them there. Now, this is us in the swamp. You can see this is a slum. This is a swamp. The biggest problem I had here was I have to move them out, because actually it was so insecure for them. During the rainy season, some of them would really be flooded. But I'm moving them out without selling this to anybody. You understand what that means? You have got to get money to relocate them, and then let this go back to Mother Nature. And that is like twice as expensive. First of all, while they're here, they've been here for very long. They feel it's better for them to stick here because they can do their small business in the city center. So even if you're to show them a very good household outside, they don't know where to begin from. So I learned that this is more beyond urban planning. It has to go with economic employment. And so I approached UN Women, it was then UNIFEM, and we worked through delivering as one. We started training people in construction, in local handcraft business. So we realized, you don't tell me that I should go somewhere because there's a house. No. I need to know how am I going to earn my life. And that is like a whole holistic thing. And then slowly by slowly, we go through. Relocated site. These are the houses we constructed. So people left there. People left there to come to these houses. These houses are in the suburban areas of Kigali. But I'm telling you, much as you see, and they were part of the process, because this house, beyond it's made from hydrofoam. Then the waste in the toilet is we worked with our university. It's producing biogas. Then from the national or from the national electricity and water company, we managed to bargain. So they got water and electricity at like 60% reduction. We tried to do everything possible to fit it in, but we still had to do a lot of accompaniment, because in this house it meant that if they're used to loitering with their bananas, now this time they cannot, because it's a little bit far. So what is the replacement? So we did urban agriculture and so many other things, and now it's much, much different. Actually, it's more beautiful than that. Yeah, I'm still showing you now. You can see the tradition of the homestead. Now they have started occupying. You can see this one is occupied. You can see the fence. You can see the greenery. They're trying to make it a bit more beautiful. And there is where they come from. Now, this is the other part of Eastern Province. I brought this in to show you that urbanization, we don't talk about urbanization only in cities. We had grass-thatched houses scattered. These were the good ones actually, because you no longer have a grass thatch, but the grass thatch were scattered all over the place. And you need to have access to health services, you need to improve agriculture, but you have little gardens here and there, and you cannot train people well. So again, through mobilizing people, the upper one is the improved settlement zone, and you can see already people have started working on their homes, moving from here, leaving this and that, and then finally coming to that. It is a process, it takes a while, but I think it's worthwhile. Now this is the other upper end of Kigali, and people feel comfortable living here because at least there is a plan for their neighborhood. So you don't have a real good area and then finally have a very poor area. This is the building of the people who are doing informal business that I talked to you about. They have constructed that first line, they have now gone to the second one, and they have a connection already with their rural colleagues. What we did again through cooperatives, because what they do here, this has become like a trading node, where produce from the rural areas comes and they sell it like at wholesale prices. They have now developed something like an MOU between them and the rural farmers, so that they can be, they can have more secure markets, and that is expanding beyond anything. And leadership doesn't have really anything much to do with this. It's just they started, and now they are, encouraging their colleagues to move faster. In conclusion, and way forward, urbanization really is a potential driver of socio-economic transformation when founded on sound governance, planning, economy, and timely infrastructure investment. And this was further endorsed. Rio Plus 20, in one of its declarations, indicated that we cannot think of global sustainable development. It can only be achieved if we achieve or focus on sustainable and resilient urbanization. What I found as key principles in all that I have mentioned, which if it's not in place, then you will not probably get there. The first one is leadership. You need a strong leadership team, because it's a change process. This leadership has to have a vision and focus, and this leadership has to be leadership of character. Really, character is very fundamental. Two, there has to be capacity to mobilize resources, to mobilize people, to engage everybody, to mobilize investors, and mobilize also funds for infrastructure development. there has to be a commitment to deliver. It's not easy. Sometimes you try and you fail, but you don't give up. You learn from your mistakes and you move on. Then it's very, very global one. All these are not just areas where people just meet to chat, but they're areas that can build and connect you to people in the same sphere and build you further. Certainly, the role of the youth, role that was misthought, sorry about that. But the role of the youth, because as we urbanize, the percentage of youth in cities is much, much higher. We don't see that as a challenge, we see it as an opportunity, because if there is one team that really inspired me all my 5 years, even when I would walk home dead tired and just sent a text to one of the youth groups in the city, I would get something inspiring and I would move on. So there are people who are so full of energy and willingness to give their best that I think the last disservice we could ever do to them is to forget about them. So it's an issue of really learning to speak a language they speak. I used to be a very reserved person. I really didn't even used to talk that much. But you know what? I realized it won't work. They like dancing. So I started dancing. They're like, and finally it became a sport. So after office, where are we meeting? So we're going to dance for what? Then I bring in my program. Now we're going to dance, but after dancing, I want to talk about cleaning the city members. Finally, they get there and they motivate everybody. And of course, intellectual capital. In all this is why I say, you have my background. I'm not an urban planner. I'm not an urban economist. I'm a veterinarian. But I have learned a lot from people, from your food, and from others. And so I really would encourage you with whatever you have to feel free to share it with everybody else. It's been, I think, a bit long. Kindly bear with me. And thanks for listening this long.
One question. First of all, thank you. That was fascinating, and you should be very proud. I wanted to ask you a little bit about, to go into a little bit more detail, to tell us the story of the informal settlement or the slum that you replaced, that was in the swamp, and rehoused all of those residents. And it seems to me that I spent some time I guess 2 years ago now, in South Africa, and not only in South Africa, it's just an enormous challenge in South Africa and in many countries in the world, where just the population is growing so rapidly, the slums are growing so quickly, and although they are building housing, the pace at which they're building is being completely outpaced by the pace at which the slums are growing. So I'm wondering, first of all, sort of how did you manage that? How did you find the resources, especially when you weren't even selling the land underneath, to rehouse those households? Were those owner-occupied homes or are they rental homes, those small homes that they went to live in? And why small homes? Why low density? I mean, and that's one of the things that I asked when I was in Cape Town, Johannesburg. I mean, whatever. I'm from New York. I think of high rises as being more sustainable, and if you want to, you talked about the costs of sprawl, and so I see these sort of low density homes. So that might have been 3 questions. I'm sorry. I said I was going to ask one. I think I asked you 3. So I wonder just the practical, how did you do it financially? And are those owner occupied, and why? Sort of the owner rental question. And that's something else that I saw in South Africa, that there was a lot of sort of cultural interest in home ownership rather than rental housing, and why the low rise and not high rise.
Okay, I will try to give you an answer, but if I happen to probably have forgotten some of the aspects
I know.
Raised, you
I'll remind you.
Me. Yes, I think the first one is, how did I manage? I in every plan, I try to look for a way of looking for a compensatory mechanism.
Yeah.
I showed you the aspect of the swamp, but that swamp was going up also. I mean, beyond the swamp, that land was going up a hill.
Okay.
So what we did, because the master plan was very clear on a bigger zone,
Yeah.
I took, I think it was about 15 hectares.
Yeah.
And of that 15 hectares, about 4 or 5 was in the swamp.
Okay.
The other 11 was to be developable land.
Okay.
So what we did was to calculate the cost market rate of the land, so that for one to be able to, for the amount of money that we would get from the developable land, we would be able to compensate at least something like 60–70% of the cost of that which we couldn't. Okay. That was one. Secondly, I partnered with some of the government, but also private and civil society organizations to reduce for me the cost.
Okay.
We've got the Social Security Fund, and Social Security Fund back at home was supporting people in terms of like social houses and social amenities. So from there, we were able to get a bit of a subsidy from Social Security Fund. Then we used material that was affordable, because when we talk about hydroform, really that is mud brick, but you use pressure to make it firm. So the amount of cement and other construction material was a lot less. Then we took on consultants to look for the cheapest, the most cost-effective house that is landed. My ideal situation would have been to be a bit high. Yeah. But at that point in time, going a bit high would request more construction material, which was more expensive. So we took on, we had some consultants from Germany. Yeah. And we, like I told you, we worked with the Germans, we worked with the local communities, and that house that you saw there, they developed a number of models. We chose it because it was like the cheapest that we could get from there. Then I approached the university, Kigali Institute of Science and Technology, and they provided the technology, which was again a bit cheaper, much cheaper certainly than I would have got from the communities. Then community participation. These people, while we were shifting them, at least, well, they recognized, because I remember 2006 we lost about 26 people in the rainy season, just rainy season. So they were losing their lives, and they were, much as they wanted to stay doing business, but they knew the cost. So for me, it was, you have to do something as a contribution. At least come, clear the land, maybe do even the collection of the mud. You have to do something, and we're going to do it together. So for me, it wasn't about like enforcing them to do it. I would, again on this specific day, I would mobilize private companies. Yeah. I remember one time we actually called the Speaker of Parliament. And this was like, we really are going to help people rebuild and regain their lost lives. So when someone from a slum is now making bricks with the Speaker of Parliament, it's no longer brickmaking, this is business. It is something big, and that makes, like, breaks all the barriers. Yeah. So in that way, so the different bits and pieces of things that we put together, and finally also government, and from the city budget, we made. Yeah.
Is it rental housing, or are those homes owned by the?
They will finally be owned, but we developed a mechanism where they signed an agreement with a housing bank.
So it's sort of a rent-to-own model?
Exactly.
So after they stay, they build equity.
Exactly, exactly, because we thought it was the safest way forward, and we tried also to indicate to them that over time, this is going to be very valuable. I'm telling you right now, it is very, very valuable.
I bet.
Now, in terms of why landed housing in slums, because a slum is an unplanned informal settlement. You talk about high-rise when you are organized. You talk about high-rise when you have a sense of security. But if you don't have security of tenure, even if you had the money, it wouldn't be very easy for you to invest your money into something that you know can be demolished tomorrow. So you need a sense of security for you to invest into something that is big. But you also need some infrastructure. Yeah. You're not going to put up a high-rise where you don't have a road, where you don't have a sewer, where finally actually it's going to be too expensive for you to maintain it. Yeah. So this is like people come in the city, and they try to do something out of their own, individual capacity, but at the same time, they know that they're doing it informally to the extent that some of them actually might be built at night. Because they know during that day, they will be asked, can I have a look at your construction permit? So you can't build a high rise without a construction permit. It will take a while, and sooner than later, inspectors will come to you and ask you what you're up to. So this is something like a makeshift that people that make that. But I think what is important in what you've raised, how do you manage that migration? While we focused on the city, the national program of development was holistic, and it is still holistic. As we invest in the city, we do also invest on rural development. And there have been strategic engagements to make the rural areas as attractive as the urban. So if you're having like agricultural input, some of them subsidized. If you're training people, they're in cooperatives. If people are more easily accessing financing, and they feel a sense of security, and once they have their produce, then they have got a big market. They only come to the city as investors. Then they'll also come with conditions. They'll come and say, we want land.
They're not coming out of desperation.
They're not coming out of
like they are in South Africa.
Exactly. So that
coming
is
across
very,
the border. From the north.
That is, and I think for the last 10, 12, 13 years, agriculture really, in terms of even contributing to GDP, has been very, very significant. But there have been improved breeds of whether crops or livestock. It is business, and the investors, and they also travel and they look for knowledge and they debate. So it's that serious.
Well, we should other questions?
Yes, please.
Just the distance between where they were and where you relocated them. What was that?
I think it was about I think 10 kilometers. It was about 10. It was still like, it was in the peri-urban, but the peri-urban turning towards more of a residential zone that has like trading, small trading centers, but just to service the residential. Whereas there where they had been was like in the city center, the swamp like runs across. So they were like close to what you would consider to be like the central business district. And that was the gap. They still can commute. What we did is we come up the road, so they still can get access to the city. But to get access to the city, it has to do like maybe with business beyond the informal, beyond the carrying of fruits or whatever on the. Yes, please, and then.
I want to ask you, what means of transportation were offered to convince these people that that distance between the city center and where they live now was doable because they were no longer in the very
There is public transport, but because it was, like I mentioned, it was a residential area, we still had to negotiate and ensure that the public transport, the buses, commute to that particular area, which is not really that far. The main thing, I think the challenge was business. But I think we did like 3 things. One, with women and some men, we have traditional handcrafts that we do back at home, which people know somehow, but they have never taken it as business. I remember my mom doing it like in the evening when when they're telling us stories, and then they do it, but not as an income-generating activity. But it's so beautiful. So we worked on that, and we made things that people really need. Unfortunately, I didn't carry any with me next time. It's like beads, necklaces. We packaged it very nicely. We worked with an upcoming private individual who was really good at it. By the time I left, they were exporting to Japan, to Finland. They were the best in the region at that time, and actually even to Macy's.
Wow.
Seriously. But it's one thing, because I think sometimes people fear, when they think about business and international business, they will think about, going to invest and the rest of it. But there is existing capacity that can be made into an industry. And the problem is, how do you transform that traditional sort of like something subsistence into an industry where a lady will leave home and go to weave, And then some friend comes and says, I want to tell you a story about what happened last year. Then like, this woman says, no, I have an appointment, I have an engagement, I have to deliver this basket. Tomorrow, no better than midday. That was the culture. So we tried now to get them out of homestead, because what happens at home is like they do it as a Bible. They'll do it if there is nothing to distract them. But if they leave and go to a weaving, what do I call it? Like a center. A center where they're being trained, where the designs now are made. They live like they go to office like I go to office. So finally, once they start getting the money, then they know that this time is serious business. And if it's quality, you'll again be given added value. Then finally, as we talk about that, we start talking about reproductive health. Then more, we talk about saving. Then we talk about, improving learning skills. You can become a manager, and finally, this is what is happening. That is one end, the construction, because the construction industry is booming. But when we get the construction industry and you haven't prepared the people, you will find a lot of, it's very good to have the foreigners coming in, but you should also tap into your local labor. So what are you doing about it? So they were again trained, and we encourage the companies to take on a few and train them slowly by slowly. And as they learn, then they also continue studying. I think the third was now tapping into the upcoming rural economy. So they get out of the town, instead of loitering with the bananas, they find out who is producing bananas, who's producing maize. You keep a store, you know how to irrigate to keep them produce very nicely. You look for a market outside, and they put themselves together. And instead of doing it on there, they do it as a business, and finally they are doing trade regionally. So that is the difference. The difference is how secure are you with your bananas on your back, and how dignified is it? It was not very easy, but we had to put facts as long as it's an alternative. Yes, please.
I was wondering what type of opposition you experienced from
This is real American accent.
from the residents, like the slum residents,
Yeah.
or any other stakeholders, and how you dealt with that.
How did I?
How you dealt with the opposition.
It was tough. At some point, I felt like I was hitting the wall. But I think what I did was to focus on, like I mentioned, having specific groups and taking off time. And ensuring that I had time to engage people. And communication is very clear. One, people had to know the why. And they wanted to know where in your bigger plan, where they belong, and what are you assuring them of. So the model house was developed first. Then we invited the people who were affected by this particular zone to visit the model house. We identified the land where we're going to build with, again, President there. We told them the whole process. We requested them now to organize themselves and be with us in that whole process. We even told, we agreed with them that some things might probably take a while, maybe others we may not be able to give them everything, but they had a platform where we could give them like a social anchor. There were some specific problems with people whom you couldn't put in any of those specific boxes I'm telling you. Like the elderly, like maybe child-headed households. You cannot talk about this business. They are just vulnerable, and that's it. So we had a particular group, and those would have to be supported directly. And I had to work with civil society and directly also support them. So we engaged in a lot of time, but also we brought them together partnership. And one step at a time, we kept on explaining that. But I think what was most important is to say, you're leading this, the alternative design. And then as problems keep on coming, some of them we had planned for, others we hadn't foreseen, but we were committed to following through. And then there was the key thing of celebrating achievement. however small. Because I think the biggest, of course I had media. And media is out to scrutinize. It is very important. But sometimes I think it skews things. It like puts a lot of emphasis on the small negative, and without putting it into the bigger picture, you can lose focus, or you can just say, no, I'm letting go. It's not working. So it was important that while media was looking for the negative, I was also inviting press conferences for the positive. And I was celebrating achievements one at a time. And then one time I asked myself, why should it be me to talk about the achievements? Maybe let me talk to people, and whoever feels there's an achievement, my job is to access media. So this person can talk about their own testimony. And then we also learned to take people beyond, because I think people many times feel overwhelmed if you think you are in a unique situation that nobody has ever been in. But again, through networks with my colleagues, because I had sister city relationships, we developed these sister city relationships to bring our communities together. And I remember 2010, we went for the World Cup with some of those communities.
Yeah.
Because for me, like I told you, I had learned a number of things from them. Some of them was really celebrating sports. I'm not very good at it, but now I know. At least I know something that happened in the city, who won who.
Yeah.
And I really have to know. And then whenever there was a reason for me to celebrate, it would be.
Yeah.
Then spontaneous visits, they make a difference. Because if you don't do that, you can think I'm doing wonderful things because you're seeing pictures of houses. But if people haven't had dinner, that's it. It really doesn't matter which kind of house you're talking about. And you won't be able to tell that because not everybody's going to cry out to you that you haven't had it. How do you find out? Just visit them after maybe work or one afternoon, it's lunchtime, you go, you chat with them, then you find out these people, where did they last go? What is going on here? So when you realize the problems, then you again sit. So you have to look for ways that really make them feel you're part of them, and you don't do it alone. I'm keeping on saying I, but really in the name of the leadership, because there are a number of leaders at that level who would go ahead to do that and alert me. So there was, I think that's another thing on leadership, in that you need to be strong enough to feel that it's not a one woman or man's show.
Right.
Everybody out there wants
That's
to
right.
do some good. And I wasn't like the best at it.
Right.
So I encouraged my team to go out and try out their best, and then I'll support them. And then also be able to stand and say, I'm sorry if things haven't gone the right way, and really go out and say it, even on media, and say, I'm very sorry, I didn't intend it to happen this way.
Yeah.
And I take responsibility and